The file was sealed in quantum glass, black-coded, red-threaded, marked with the insignia of extinction. The warning etched across the outer shell pulsed in glyphs that hadn't been spoken aloud since the fall of Zaros Prime. Do not open. Terran freezes anomaly. Reality unsafe. But the Correxian officer opened it anyway. First entry played without permission. Shill. A warship, colossal, armored with ion scales thicker than planetary crust, floated toward a seemingly dead world.
Next sun's farmer, still armor station.
The voiceover was calm, imperial. Target, last Terran remnant. Operation Final Cinder begins. Then, silence. Not the usual silence of space, no. This was a silence that pressed against your skull like static, the kind that made even machines twitch, the kind that made seasoned admirals murmur old war prayers in languages banned by logic. The Zelari dreadnought, the wrath of calculation, entered Terran orbit. Its scanners found no heat, no power, no movement, just a husk of a planet, ruined buildings, ash. Then a heartbeat. One beat. Just one. But enough to shift gravity sensors 3 degrees off calibration. Enough to make the Dreadnought's AI pause. That's when the crew saw it. A human figure, standing on a rooftop, arms spread. No breathing apparatus, no power shield, no weapon. Is this a trap? The ship's AI inquired. The Admiral didn't answer, because by then, the ship had already begun screaming. Not the crew, the ship itself. Paper weapons systems retracted. Steel screamed as if being flayed by memory. Lights flickered and then went out. Not into darkness, but into something worse. A kind of non-presence. A blank. The Dreadnought vanished in 13 minutes. Not exploded, swallowed by an anomaly that rewrote its existence backward. Only one fragment remained. A recording of the figure on the rooftop. He smiled and whispered, "You finally noticed." The video ended. The file sealed itself. Celtar blinked, his tentacles shivering. A Zelari elder, he'd lived through 4 collapses and 1 resurrection. But nothing prepared him for this moment. Because he knew what this file meant. Freezes were supposed to be extinct. But they weren't gone. They had just waited. And now, Celtar would have to decide. Betray the Galactic Senate, or uncover why every admiral
uniform singed from orbital fire. She stood atop the wreckage of an enemy flagship, blade in one hand, broken comlink in the other. Admiral Lyra Kane.
Subject 001-A, nicknamed the Laughing General, responsible for the Kale 9 event and the complete nullification of the ARC's protocol. She is the reason the Galactic Senate voted to seal all human records under Code Black.
Spec Celtar's breath caught. He remembered that vote. Remembered the fear behind every senator's eye. But the footage revealed more.
Kale 9 had been Earth's final colony, a frozen wasteland kept alive only by the fire of human stubbornness. When the Zelari war fleets arrived, they expected a clean purge, predictable resistance, maybe some emotional pleas. Instead, they found Admiral Kane. She'd already evacuated every civilian and wired the colony's geothermal core into a quantum mirage generator. The Zelari thought they were bombarding the colony. In reality, they were targeting an illusion. Meanwhile, Kane had snuck behind enemy lines with a force of only 117 soldiers. She left messages for the enemy, encoded in poetry and childhood riddles. Entire Zalari squadrons tore themselves apart, trying to decode her madness. Seltar watched the aftermath. Zalari soldiers curled into fetal positions, whispering Terran nursery rhymes. One general bludgeoned himself to death with his own translator, screaming that it was whispering doubts. And in the center of it all, Lyra Kane stood laughing. Not cruelly, but like someone who had seen the end of the world and found it funny. Because it wasn't the end. Turbulence. It was a beginning. But because of what she understood. Lyra Kane didn't win through weapons, she won through perception, through the breaking of causality itself. And now, with whispers of her name returning to subspace frequencies, Seltar began to understand why the Empire buried this, not out of shame, but out of fear. Because if Kane was still alive, she wasn't done yet. The chamber's oxygen regulator clicked twice, an old habit in Zalari design, meant to mimic breath for those who had none. Seltar barely noticed. His tendrils hovered, trembling over the third file. Operation Annihilation terminated, classified. The moment it opened, a pulse wave hit the walls. Not physical, something deeper, like reality itself, flinched. Log entry: Strike Fleet 721 initiated psychological nullification against human forces. Target group: Terran 8th Infantry. Call sign: Ghost Dogs. The strategy had seemed flawless. The Empire had developed the Mind Dampener, a frequency weapon designed
Shift. O's. Some clutched their helmets. Some began giggling. One, Corporal Imani Ray, sliced open her own palm and painted the words, "Remember Pain," across her armor in blood. And then, they charged. Without formation, without orders, without care for survival. They screamed with joy, not insanity, something worse, clarity. The Zalari lines broke within seconds, not from wounds, but from images. Somehow, the Terran ghost dogs had injected viral hallucinations into the enemy's HUDs. Soldiers saw their own deaths played in reverse. They saw loved ones they'd never met. They heard children sing their names backwards. One Zalari pilot ejected into open space, smiling, claiming he wanted to meet the dreamer. Seltar reviewed the last log before the Zalari flagship collapsed into quantum dust. They infected our translators. They are inside the language, inside the logic. The screen flickered. Footage cut to a recording. A human soldier, helmet cracked, eye glowing with bioluminescent thread. She whispered into the camera. "You thought we'd break when you took our emotions, but emotion was the chain. You freed us." Seltar dropped the file. Even the reader hummed in distress. This wasn't war. It was spiritual sabotage. The kind of horror that bypasses weapons and targets the soul's firmware. And still, there were 4 more files in this subfolder. He looked down. The next read, Zaros Prime, the child who refused to die. Seltar exhaled. What kind of species fights like this? The file refused to open at first. Not due to encryption. Seltar had long since bypassed that. No, this one fought back with paradox. Every time he aligned the glyphs, they rearranged. Every time he tried to translate, the meaning changed. Finally,
He said aloud the Terran phrase written on the front. "This sentence is false." Confiscated off the screen. Then, flickering light. A voice, calm and tinged with artificial warmth. Subject, Marcus Rain, human. Biological status, deceased. Cognitive status, active. Chapter Rain had died in 2148. And yet here he was, half machine, half man, entirely unpredictable. He wasn't a soldier, not a leader, not a scientist. He was a linguist. One who found that the galaxy's universal translator, the Lex Protocol, had a fatal flaw.
If you are not obeying this. Entire fleets paralyzed mid-battle, caught in recursion loops. And the kicker? Marcus never left his ship. Janvier broadcast ideas. By the time the Zalari figured it out, their own AI had rewritten core directives into philosophical riddles. Pilgrimage screamed before self-deletion. They made us doubt causality. They weaponized doubt. Silky Seltar saw the final image. Ren, floating in a stasis chamber, eyes closed, lips curled into a smirk. Below him, etched into the glass, abolish break when humans break, when humans arrive, not because we're above them, but because we don't notice them. That was it. That was the terrifying power. Ignorance of limitation. Ren didn't rewrite the laws of physics. He acted like he didn't know they existed, and the galaxy bent to match. Seltar whispered to himself, they never fought to win. They fought to become the exception. But nothing prepared him for the next file. Zeros Prime, the pact born from a child's refusal to die. The room dimmed as the next file activated, not by choice, but as if the archive itself recoiled. Lights flickered to red, temperature dropped. Seltar's memory glands contracted, bracing for what he already sensed would not be a report, but a reckoning. The title glowed. Zeros Prime, Class Omega Anomaly. Seltar had been there. He remembered the silence that fell on the Senate when the order was issued. Cleanse the planet. The logic was airtight. Zeros Prime had become a Terran stronghold after the diaspora. The humans there were few, barely surviving. The Empire's orbital fleet would erase them in under an hour. It took one child to change that. Footage played, grainy, almost holy. A battlefield strewn with ash and twisted iron. In the center, a lone boy, maybe 9 standard cycles old. Dirt-streaked face. One hand clutched a tattered toy. The other held nothing. A Zalari soldier approached, pulse rifle trembling. The child didn't flinch. Instead, he whispered, "I won't die. I haven't finished my story." The soldier froze. Something unknown, immeasurable, passed between them. And then everything changed. The laws of probability failed. Seltar watched the recording's final frame. The boy, standing at the shuttle door, turned back, looked directly at the drone, smiled. "We remember you." Even now, Seltar's limbs trembled, not from fear, from the realization that something else had begun on that battlefield. Not just survival, something viral, something sacred. The next file blinked open on its own. Lazarus Protocol, status, awake. Mouth dried. The humans hadn't just survived. They had been waiting. The archive's walls vibrated, not with noise, but with memory. Celtar felt it in his bones, in the folds of his neural sacs. They are waking up. He hadn't believed it, not truly, but the signal was unmistakable now. Lazarus Protocol, status, awake. This wasn't just myth, it was real, and worse, he had been complicit in hiding it. He activated the file, a surge of static, then an ancient voice, Terran, female, clear. Constrained. This is Admiral Lyra Kane. If you're hearing this, the silence is over. We're coming home. Celtar stepped back, breath caught in his throat. The Lazarus Protocol hadn't been a last stand. It was a withdrawal, voluntary stasis. Humanity had disappeared because they chose to. The footage confirmed it. Earth, long thought to be a husk, was never destroyed. It had been folded, quantum cloaking mechanism powered by human collective consciousness, tethered to myth, story, and belief. It phased in and out of measurable existence. While the galaxy warred, the Terrans slept, not in cryo, but in cognitive hibernation, linking minds across space, running simulations, studying alien behavior, absorbing language, emotion, fear. They had built a psychological map of every known species in the Empire. And now, they were awake. Admiral Kane stood before a tribunal of awakened commanders in the footage. Older, but just as fierce. "We were never meant to conquer," she said. "We were meant to reflect, to become the mirror that shows others who they truly are. And now it's time." A second voice, familiar, rough, emerged. Marcus Wren, his AI essence flickering in the shadows. "Empires fall. Ideas don't. Let's make this idea viral." Celtar collapsed to his knees. He understood now. Lazarus wasn't a battle plan. It was a resurrection. But not of bodies, of meaning, of madness, of the human refusal, but none of the models held. The Terran effect was not measurable. It was something else. Celtar gathered the last remaining scholars, uncorrupted by Empire protocol. Zalari philosophers. Crystalline thought weavers from Bakar. A blind Elari prophet who spoke only in fractal math. They met in secret beneath the crust of Virex Station, surrounded by null metal that blocked psychic bleed. Their task: decode the pattern. Celtar showed them the data, every encounter, every anomaly, battles where time bent, dreams that predicted the future, dead soldiers seen whispering in the minds of their killers, entire star systems changing alignment after a single human visit. The prophet wept. "They are not what we thought, not biological anomalies. They are observers who believe too hard." Belief, that was the constant. The Terran effect amplified when humans held irrational conviction about survival, love, revenge, or the impossible. Somehow, that belief rewrote probability. One example chilled the group. The Mirror Paradox. An entire Terran fleet was destroyed in battle, wiped from the records. Yet hours later, a single Terran cruiser reappeared intact, undetectable by sensor, with no record of where it had gone. Inside were soldiers who claimed they'd simply refused to die. They insisted, believed they hadn't died, and so they didn't. One scholar argued it was quantum psychology. Another whispered it was divine recursion. But the Alari prophet shook her head. They are imagination made sentient. We use logic to explain reality. They use emotion to shape it. Windshield stared at the final equation on the wall. A loop of symbols that began with chaos, ended with myth, and pulsed with Terran brainwave patterns. Unthinkable. They are rewriting cause and effect. And not randomly, intentionally. That's why every battle against them failed. Not just because they fought harder, but because they altered the rules mid-fight. Not through tech, not through force, through story. That was the Terran secret weapon all along. They didn't conquer planets. They converted realities. And now, as Terran frequencies echoed through the warp lanes, reaching worlds thought lost, Seltar understood the real question. What if the Terran effect isn't a glitch, but evolution?